The New York Giants must make a decision on Daniel Jones, not just before the fifth year option of May 2nd, where you decide whether you want the fifth year or not. They need to decide it before the NFL draft. And the reason I said they need to decide it before the NFL draft is because there are so many options available that they need to decide where they're going at the most important position, and that's the quarterback position with Daniel Jones. Let's get into it because you brought on a brand new head coach. You got a brand new general manager, Joe Shane, already talking the talk, sitting there saying, we believe in Daniel Jones. We know what he can be. We know what he's going to be, and we believe in him. And then you bring in a guy that had a tremendous career with Alabama, a tremendous career with the Buffalo Bills. You bring him in to be your head coach. And Brian Daboll really instilled that offense in Buffalo that took advantage of Josh Allen's mobility and talent and really catered an offense to Josh Allen and what Josh Allen does best. Now, ultimately, bringing in a guy like Stephon Diggs over there and then the work ethic and the relationship of Josh Allen in the offseason and having Brian Daboll there, that did a tremendous job building what they built in Buffalo. Now they're hoping to do the same in New York. But the issue is the timeline of Daniel Jones and what he could project to be and when you have to pay him does not add up. And this is the same thing I discussed last year about the New York Jets, because I do believe that Sam Darnold has talent. I don't know if that talent will ever shine through, especially with what he's been through with the New York Jets, seeing ghosts against the New England Patriots and everything like that. But the timeline of when you would have to potentially pay Sam Darnold, pick up the fifth-year option, or put the franchise tag on him, or sign him to an extension, it just did not add up with where this team was headed. Same thing, different New York team, same situation. You have Daniel Jones, where his fifth-year option needs to be picked up by May 2nd. May 2nd is the deadline. In that fifth-year option, they were hoping that it would be right around the $20 million mark. Now it's right around roughly $24 million if they pick up the fifth-year option, which $5 million goes a long way. $5 million absolutely goes a long way. The other option that they could choose is to decline the fifth-year option on Daniel Jones, believe in Daniel Jones, and worst comes to worst, they prove him wrong, and they got to slap the franchise tag on him. Well, slapping the franchise tag on them could potentially cost upwards of an extra $8 million if they decide to not go the route of the franchise tag compared to picking up the fifth-year option. That's an $8 million difference potentially. So my theory is that they ultimately need to decide in which direction that they're going with their quarterback. Are they all in? Are they picking up the fifth-year option? Are they going with an extension? What are they doing with Daniel Jones? And right, wrong, or indifferent, we really haven't been able to dissect Daniel Jones from a standpoint of what he projects to be and if he could ultimately meet those projections because of having guys like Jason Garrett with his, saltine cracker type of offense. And what I mean by saltine type of cracker offense is a boring offense. That's what it is. It was bland. It was boring. Daniel Jones needed somebody that was going to take advantage of his skill set. Now, you saw it a little bit with Freddie Kitchens, just a little bit, where they used his athleticism, and that's what they're hoping will reignite Daniel Jones' career. And why I say they need to decide now compared to later is because you take a look at the draft. They have 2 first-round draft picks this year. They set themselves up nicely. Say what you will about the former GM. He may not have done many great things while he was here. The one thing that he did is he left with a bang. And when he left you with 2 first-round draft picks this year. And that could go a long way in deciding ultimately what you want to do. Now, you take a look at this quarterback draft class. I do think there is some talent. I think it's top heavy. I think Malik Willis and Kenny Pickett are the obvious top two quarterbacks. Desmond Ridder has slowly risen up some people's draft boards. Sam Howell has the talent, but that last year, how much does that stick out in your mind? And I'll tell you this about Sam Howell's last year. Say what you will, but at North Carolina, between 2 years ago and last year, where his draft stock, he went from potentially being the number 1 overall pick to potentially not even being a first-round pick. Take a look at what happened. He lost his top 2 wide receivers to the NFL draft. He lost his top 2 running backs to the draft. That's a hard situation for anybody to succeed in. And Sam Howell was relentless, and at times he showed the ability to be a number 1 overall pick in this year's draft. Then you have guys like Matt Corral, who is he a product of the Lane Kiffin system? And one of the places that he would fit would be with the New York Giants, because I seen that same kind of up-tempo RPO style that you have with Brian Dable that he ran in a pro-style RPO type of offense at Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin. Then you have Carson Strong, who has a tremendous amount of talent, but you really weren't able to see it at Nevada. What is he going to be? Is his upside worth drafting him in the first round? Now, what I look at is I think Malik Willis has the potential to ultimately be a franchise-altering quarterback. Now, he's got to be put in the right situation. You got to have patience. You got to grow with him. And Malik Willis has to put the work in, because you take a look at what he had with Liberty. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Go through that roster. I don't think he had one receiver over 5'10". And that talent there at Liberty, although he might not have been playing against tremendous talent in return, it was often known Malik Willis by far was the best player on that team. Offense, defense, doesn't matter. Best player by far carried that team. He has the talent. He has that Wyoming Josh Allen type of feel with him. Now it comes to the work ethic. It comes to the mechanics. It comes to the anticipation that comes with your throws in the NFL, because not everybody's going to be 5 yards open. If you get 1 foot of separation on a DB, guess what? In the NFL, that's considered being open. And that's something that Malik Willis needs to ultimately decide if he can be at the next level. So for this, I sit there and say there is talent. Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett. And you take a look at these Giants 2 draft picks. They will have a tremendous opportunity to pick from either potentially Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett. Do they fall in love with one of those guys? Is one of those guys a upgrade over what they currently have with Daniel Jones? And in the long run, is it worth it taking an upgrade over Daniel Jones that may be a slight upgrade, but then you take a look at the 2023 NFL draft and the quarterbacks that might potentially be available then? And I sit here and say this for a reason, because you look ahead to the 2023 draft, and there are 5 teams that have 2 first-round picks. In all 5 teams have questions at the quarterback level. So Seattle, they just traded away Russell Wilson. They now have 2 first-round picks, and they are going to be putrid. So if somehow they win a couple of games and, they draft 5th and they want to go up and get Bryce Young or CJ Stroud, they're going to have 2 first-round picks to be able to move up and get that. The Philadelphia Eagles traded one of their first-round picks this year to get 2 first rounds next year. They have 2 first-round picks next year. Could Jalen Hurts ultimately be the guy? We don't know. He has every single intangible that you would want in an NFL quarterback. He just has not shown the ability to be a consistent franchise-altering quarterback. Same thing with the Houston Texans. They have a very young quarterback going into year 2, Davis Mills. We can rant and rave about Davis Mills, who was a 5-star product going into college. Now, dealt with a lot of injuries at Stanford that ultimately led to him sliding in the draft a little bit. But is he going to be that guy for the Texans? Then you have the Detroit Lions. Jared Goff's contract has been putrid, but not bad enough where you can't get out from under it within the next year or two. They have 2 first-round picks. The Miami Dolphins, they continue to stack pile picks. And although they make these trades, they have 2 first-round picks. So it's the never-ending list of teams that have 2 first-round picks. That is Tua the answer. Is Jared Goff the answer? Is Davis Mills the answer? Is Jalen Hurts the answer? Is whoever the Seahawks end up making their number 1 quarterback going to be the answer? Do they take one this year? There's so much at stake. Do the Giants fall in love with one of these guys this year? Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, Desmond Ridder, Sam Howell, Matt Corral, Carson Strong. Do they fall in love with one of those guys? Because if they do, you take them. But you took a high risk on drafting Daniel Jones, number 6 overall. Or do you look ahead to the 2023 draft and say, listen, we ultimately need to trade back from one of our first-round picks this year. Maybe Seattle wants to get in on this. Maybe Seattle really loves Malik Willis or Kenny Pickett. Let's get a first-round pick out of it. Let's let them move up. Let's get a first-round pick out of them. Because in 2023, unless the Giants are so bad that they're picking in the top 2 to top 3, they're not going to have the opportunity to draft a franchise-altering quarterback next year. And this is where the whole decision comes into play. The whole decision that May 2nd, picking up that 5th-year option or potentially slapping a franchise tag on Daniel Jones, money moves. Or do you ultimately look and fall in love with a guy this year? They have looked at plenty of quarterbacks from this year. Or do you say 2023, look at it. C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Phil Jurkovec, Anthony Richardson, who is dealing with an injury history but should be QB number 1 for Florida this year. Or potentially one of the risers that were high on the list just 2 years ago that have kind of fell off but could potentially make their way back on this list. DJ Uingalay from Clemson. He's battling with freshman Cade Klubbernick for the starting job out in Clemson. But with a great year, he could potentially be up there like Joe Burrow did with his career. You know, Spencer Rattler, he fell off a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. He had a tremendous 5-star recruit behind him. And when things went a little bit south, it was time to change. Now he's with South Carolina. Can he make that bounce back? You know, one name that we forget about from USC, Keaton Slovis. You know, he's now with Pittsburgh. Can he do what Kenny Pickett did and have that outstanding year where he puts himself in a situation of being a first-round pick? Caden Daniels, you know, Arizona State, he's one of the top-rated dual-threat quarterbacks, but ultimately had a bad offense and a bad offensive system around him at ASU that led to him transferring to LSU. Can LSU bring the best out of him? Does he have that Joe Burrow type of season? I keep saying Joe Burrow because remember, Joe was supposed to be a 5th, 6th round pick and became a number 1 overall pick. That's how far this man went in one season. Or do you go with a steadier, safer option who just won the national championship last year with a Stenson Benton or potentially his backup, JT Daniels? Do you go with the Stenson Bennett or do you go with JT Daniels? There are plenty of options. This next year's draft is going to be a lot thicker than this year's draft. And all this comes down to the New York Giants making a decision before May 2nd, before the NFL draft. That's ultimately when they make the decision.